Hi, everybody. I became introduced to Shelley and David Park when I heard them as guests on Jamar Tisby's podcast entitled Footnotes with Jamar Tisby, and a podcast series he did entitled Fighting Racism. This podcast introduced to folks like me that racism is not an ideology invented by people of African descent. Rather, people of European descent who are considered, quote, white, hold that dubious distinction of actually creating racism. Hence, the question arose on this particular podcast: what is the role of white people in fighting racism? Because it was our European ancestors who created the construct of race, the construct of whiteness itself, and hence, construct of racism. This podcast, where I got introduced to Shelley and David Park, was part 4 of the Fighting Racism series. The Parks are the transracial adoptive parents of a son who is Black. They composed a curriculum called Let's Talk Race, a beginner's guide to conversations about race, which is the title of this workshop. In this 5-week course, they talk to predominantly other white people like me about how to talk to yet other white people about race. I've taken this 5-week course, and after I did, I knew to invite this credible messenger adoptive parent couple to share this curriculum and its tools with us at this conference today. A curriculum inspired by the adoption of their Black son, but it's not just about our field. It's about a wider audience, particularly in their church community. Here at the Coalition, we have been focused on anti-racism and social justice issues with 4 in-house subcommittees for over the past 3 years. Our staff is always asking us for tools on how to do our work better. I strongly believe this curriculum is an amazing tool. As a white person, I continue to this day to have trouble talking about race to other white people, my relatives, my cousins, my own extended family, people I grew up with whose Facebook posts disturb me just about every single day. In fact, I could say I really stink at talking to other white people about race. So I am turning this conversation over to the Parks right now. And my parting comment is that if you happen to be a white person who longs for or wants to talk to other white folks in your life about race, you are in the absolute right place to learn more and to gain access to perhaps your starter kit on the tools that will make you better at reaching out to these other people in your life. And I thank you so much, Shelley and David, for being with us today, and I want to turn it over to you.
All right, Pat, thank you. Thanks for that introduction, and we're really glad you took the class. That was a real honor on our part, and we're really honored to be asked to be with you all today and this great conference that Pat and his team put on. It's been exciting to hear about the good work that you guys are doing, and to us, it is just a joy to be with a group of adoptive and foster and kinship type parents, because we just it's just very close to our heart. And so we thought we'd have a conversation with you today about the topic of race. We're really glad to see people's faces. If you want to turn the camera on, we would love that. If it's not convenient for you, we understand. We're gonna make this interactive. We've got some things to share, maybe some ideas to share, and we want to kind of hear your thoughts, and kind of see where this goes. So welcome. As you can tell, my accent is not from New York. I grew up in East Texas, and we'll tell you a little bit of our story here in just a minute. We live in Dallas, Texas, zooming in with you today. And we want to make sure you know that everything that you hear about Texas is not true. Most of it is, but not all of it. Yeah. So we're glad you're here. We're also glad to see some folks of color on this in this workshop. And we say in our class that our workshop is designed for white people, but open for everyone. We feel like there's a conversation that needs to be had that white folks need to have with white folks about race. And but what we really, part of the conversation is that we need to listen and to our friends of color and believe them. And so we're glad that y'all are here. So we want to point out the very obvious elephant in the room, and I've just mentioned that we are white, and we're talking about race. And for far too many years, we've put this burden on our friends of color, and most of us have sat by and watched. But we believe that white people are going to have to get into the conversation if we're going to make any progress. So we spend most of our days talking to white people about race and racism, encouraging them, like Dr. King did in a letter from a Birmingham jail, where he's talked about folks needing to get off the sidelines and begin the journey of racial reconciliation and justice. One other thing that we want to mention that you should know about Shelley and I is that we do come to this conversation with a Christian perspective. That's a significant part of our story. And your story may not include that same perspective. That's totally okay. I think you'll find that the truths that inform our perspective on race are fairly universal among those who are religious and those who aren't. We are also the first to admit that Christians have a lot of culpability in the history of racism and white supremacy. A lot. And that is why we are dedicating our lives to talking to white Christians about race. So another thing you should know is we do not consider ourselves to be experts on this topic. Although I once had a lawyer tell me that an expert is defined as someone who knows more than the average person about a topic. Under that definition, maybe we're experts, but what I mean is that we've read countless books. We have listened to hours of podcasts. I've taken classes in seminary on it. But almost daily, we look at each other and say something along the lines of, how did we not know this? And this is after years of being on this journey. So as we should all be, we are all learning. So we hope that's kind of the posture you'll come to this workshop with us. And that's the one we're going to take with you.
Hi, everybody. As David mentioned, my name is Shelley, and I'm so glad to be here with you guys and honored to be included in this space. Typically, when we do our class, when we do it on Zoom, we do introductions where we ask you to kind of say your name and so I'm really interested, if you want to do that, we're not gonna force anyone to do that because we do know this is being recorded. But if you want to share that, we'd really love to know kind of who you are and maybe in one sentence, why you were crazy enough to sign up for a class talking about race. Because that's not really like at the top of the list of things people want to talk about. So
at least in Texas.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe I'm coming from a different context. If you're willing, would you just kind of unmute and real quick share that with us? Because we would just like to hear from you guys. Annie?
Hi, my name is Annie, and I'm here because I want to learn more. I am a person of color, and what I feel and what I experience, it's good. Like, my peers are uncomfortable with having a conversation. So, like, I know that you said, you have conversations with other white people, but I think this is an uncomfortable conversation for myself, and I identify as a Black woman, to have it with my peers, So I'm here to learn, put words to the feelings and put words to the experiences that I'm feeling. And I also want to understand, what's happening, outside of my head. So I'm here to learn as well.
Great.
Bonnie, I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, Renee, for putting your information in the chat. I appreciate that. It's always good to know where people are coming from. Anybody else brave enough to jump on and tell us who you are and why you're crazy enough to sign up for this class? Chris, I see unmuted. Nope.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep forgetting that it's listed as my child's name.
Oh.
I'm Kate Jo Bunker. I'm a family support specialist in the Hudson Valley. I'm also a transracial adoptive parent, so I feel it's both important both professionally and as a parent.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Wayne raised his hand.
Sure. I grew up in Brooklyn, have returned now to Brooklyn. The violence around the issue of racism just can't be ignored. My son is Afro-Colombian and walking around a white neighborhood, even though in Brooklyn, you know, our little Marine Park seems to have been an enclave. And recently hearing from some of my lifelong friends, 50 years of age, I mean, celebrating 50 years together, they're telling me stories of times when visiting me in my neighborhood, they were at risk and were chased out of the neighborhood. I did not know. I have another story where they were falsely accused. My friends were playing basketball in Marine Park, and kind of a white gang falsely accused us, our group, of doing a robbery in the neighborhood, and they came and approached my mom, who went after them with a pitchfork. So, that explains a lot as well. So there's a lot of violence around this issue, obviously, and in the care of our children. As I was telling my son as he arrived here in this country, about being able to be articulate when you're speaking with the police, articulate, because he didn't speak very good English at all. I felt he was at even more of a risk of suffering some violence because he wasn't being compliant with orders being given to him as this black man walked through a white neighborhood.
Yeah.
All right, I'll shut up.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate you sharing those great
Yeah, that's
stories.
great.
Appreciate you being vulnerable with those. Anybody else?
And only because Mac is in a noisy place, I'm just going to read his chat. He says, "I'm a Black adult adoptee who thinks and talks about race often and have worked and organized around these issues. I currently can't talk freely because I'm in a coffee shop, but thank you, Mac, for sharing that."
Yeah.
Thank you. It's great.
And it's likely I have just about everything they'll be presenting because I went through the 5-week class.
Yep.
Okay, now I can't find, oh, there. Okay. So that should just be a big blank white screen.
Yep, you got it.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we want to give you guys just an kind of our story, and can you see how we got to where we are? So you get some old pictures, so that'll be fun. I spent most of my youth as a missionary kid in the Philippines, in one of the largest cities in the world. There were not many white people around except at my school. Because of this, I really felt like growing up that I knew what it was like to be in the minority.
And I grew up, as you can tell from my accent, in Deep East Texas, a city called Longview, Texas. My dad says that we were born behind the pine curtain of East Texas. My family would be classified as church junkies. We were there every time the doors opened. My parents were also very dedicated to the idea of social justice, especially as it affected the poor. I graduated from Longview High School in 1989, a very racially diverse school. And because I had Black friends, I considered my experience to be really well-rounded and healthy, but I really just didn't realize at the time just how segregated those years of my life were. Shelley and I met at Texas A&M University. Anybody heard of that? In the South, the Aggies, our blood runs maroon. But it's a historically white university. I have a memory of getting ready to go to college when at the store in Longview, the clerk at the counter commented about my going to A&M and said that I would be, quote, attending the last great Anglo-Saxon institution. I did not quite know what to do about that.
My favorite class in college was Rhetoric of the Civil Rights Movement with Dr. Rick Rigsby. It was an amazing class. I learned about Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Emmett Till and the Little Rock Nine. I was educated on the history of our nation and understood how racism had played a part. After graduation, we got married and we had our oldest son, Samuel. And then in 2004, we adopted our son, Jeremiah. Together, we really thought we knew all there was to know about raising a Black man in America in the 21st century.
And I had grown up in what I believed was an ideal multiracial environment, right? And in a family that showed me how to love everyone. And
I knew what it was like to be in the minority. I had learned about the history of racism and how the civil rights movement had solved the problem. I mean, sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was so much better than before.
And then that cute, sweet baby boy turned into a tall African-American young man. And we kept seeing on the news young men, some of this that were the same age as Jeremiah, being shot by police officers. In particular, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile being shot within days of each other in 2016 sent both of us really reeling. We began to just listen and read and to pray and to expand our echo chamber and listen some more. And I decided to do the weirdest thing I could think of. I literally called every Black person I knew and said, will you go to lunch with me? And over the course of about 6 months, I had about 20 lunches and conversations or more. And I asked them questions and I just listened. I listened to their stories of interactions with the police. I listened to their stories about how they felt when the first Black president was elected. I listened to so many things I did not know before.
In the fall of 2019, Tatiana Jefferson was shot in her home just down the street from where we are. She was playing video games with her nephew. And the Lord said very clearly, it's time. And every person of color that I followed on social media at the time that's in this work encourages white people to educate other white people. And I thought, well, that's something that I can do. So here's why we began teaching this class. At 13, Jeremiah asked if we could go to a church where we all blend in. Church in America is segregated. Dr. King said that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. And that was over 50 years ago, and the same can still be said today. We believe we are settling for how things have always been. We also believe that Jesus and the Bible are clear that we are to be reconciled to God and reconciled to each other. The Christian Bible calls it the ministry of reconciliation. So it's our job to do whatever we can to bring people groups who have been separated by culture, by laws, by practice back together. And we believe that one of the best ways to do that is to have meaningful conversations with each other in order to build empathy and understanding. We want to show you a short video that kind of Tim Wise kind of discusses pretty succinctly the work that we do.
The vast majority of white Americans have really never been in a position where we've had to think actively about race and racism. In fact, we sort of have the, privilege historically and still today of being really oblivious to the lived experiences of people of color. So then when those experiences get brought to our attention, either because people of color talk about them or some racial incident takes place or some study comes out demonstrating, discrimination, we're usually caught very much off guard. We're sort of in that la-la land of believing that, we're sort of in this post-racial place. And unfortunately, it's been that way for a long time. It's not just a modern phenomenon. White folks going back 40, 50 years did not, even in the early 60s, think that racism was really a big deal worth focusing very much attention on. A very small minority realized that it was. But the vast majority of whites said at that time that people of color had equal opportunity with white folks. So I think it's difficult because to be white is to be in that sort of bubble of obliviousness where you don't have to think about it. And if you don't have to think about it, you don't get a lot of practice talking about it. And if you don't have a lot of practice talking about it, when you finally have to, you usually don't have the language, you don't have the skills. It's like having a book club where people of color and white folks have all been asked to read the same book. And in this case, it's the book of their collective life. People of color have read 400 pages, white folks have read the preface, and then we're supposed to come together and have a conversation. It's not easy.
as white people, we are often at a disadvantage in discussions about race because most of us are not fluent in the language of race and racism. As Tim said, culturally, we don't put an emphasis on these conversations. Author Austin Channing Brown tells this story. When a Black child asks their mom why their skin is different from their friends, the mom sits their child down and explains about race and melanin and history and all of these things. But when a white child asks their mom, why is my skin different from my friends? The white mom says, shh, we don't talk about that. So we see our goal is helping white people learn the vocabulary of race in order to be part of the book club that Tim spoke about.
To that end, Shelley and I have created 2 lists of things for you to consider that you can do as a parent. So we're going to kind of come at this conversation from this perspective of us all being parents in the adoptive, foster, kinship kind of space, right? It's not exhaustive. It really represents our experience as parents as of a Black adopted son and our own study. We're going to go through each of the list and we'll stop for questions and comments, kind of get everybody's thoughts. The first has to do with parenting any child, regardless of their race or your race, in what we are calling a racialized society. Dr. Michael Emerson and Christian Smith wrote a really groundbreaking book called Divided by Faith. And they define a racialized society this way. They say it's a society wherein race matters profoundly for differences in life experiences, life opportunities, and social relationships. So we believe that race plays a significant role in our society today. So here are a few things for you to consider. We're going to start with you as a parent of children in general. So I'm going to go through the list and then we'll kind of get everybody's impressions, something that stuck out to you, maybe something you want to focus on. All right, so first, we believe what's really the most important is you've got to do the internal work to understand you. Examine your biases, learn your culture, and understand your privilege. If you're white, you have a culture, and trying to understand that. Second, do the work to understand society. So again, there's some work that we've got to do. Learn how race and racism function in society, both historically and currently. That both of these are really a lot of what our class focuses on, is trying to start that journey of doing your own work. It's going to be hard to parent in a racialized society if you haven't done your own internal work and work of understanding the way society functions historically and today. Then we suggest that no matter who your family is and how it's made up, that you normalize diversity, that you choose different books, toys, doctors, friends, church. Be very intentional about creating and occupying diverse spaces as much as you can. When I know as a white person in the South, it's very easy for me to navigate through life in spaces that aren't diverse. I have to be intentional about changing that. And some of the ways, especially with young kids, books, really being thoughtful about what books you're choosing. Do they have diverse characters? Are diverse characters leading the storyline in the book? Are they not just the stereotypical roles of those racial or ethnic groups, but do they lead the storyline? And then picking doctors and working to build friendships and there's lots of ways that you can be intentional about that. Fourth, we're calling it expanding your echo chamber. It was really important for us. We started following different people on social media and listening to what they had to say that were diverse voices, watching different movies and TV shows. You'd be surprised that as a white person in particular, the TV shows you watch are the ones white people watch. And there are TV shows that people of color watch that are different than the ones you watch. Try to be intentional about that and learn that. Expand your field of view. Listen to different music, etc. Then talk about it. So this may be a harder one, but it's really important, is that having conversations about race in your household is important to normalize that it's not taboo, and it's a way for you to celebrate differences with people. Kids are going to notice it. And so if you normalize it, then you set yourself up to have conversations with them later as they get older. I think about it similarly to how when we adopted Jeremiah, it was an open adoption. And we were told that you need to tell the story, the adoption story of your child from the very beginning to them, so that it normalizes the adoption experience, and it becomes a normal part of their story, as opposed to not talking about it. And then when they become more conscious, they're teenagers, and then you tell them that they're adopted. Obviously, there's challenges with that. We think race and conversations about race are similar in that way. You need to normalize it from a young age and celebrate and help your kid learn to see the beautiful things in all the other ethnic and racial groups.
I just want to add a little thing about that last one is they're going to hear conversations about it at school or on the playground or wherever they are. There's going to be interactions, and that's going to feel weird if they can't talk about it at home.
You haven't helped them practice the conversation.
Okay, so that's 5 kind of pretty basic to-dos for parenting any child in what we're calling a racialized society. So kind of want to get your feedback. What are your thoughts about that? Do you have questions about that? Does something like stick out to you like, ooh, I don't really like that? Or what's something that you can take home that you haven't done and want to expand on? Any of those answers are good. Here's a little tip about David and I. We do this all the time. We're perfectly happy with a little bit of silence and dead air. So we'll just sit here and wait till somebody unmutes and says something.
I just want to let you know, we have this conversation in my family all the time, because my daughter says, as a Black person, she can't be racist. She can only be racial. And as a white person, I can be racist. So we are constantly talking about all of that, all of those perceptions, and the way that we look and think about the world and our differences in that. But one of the things that I see when I go out into the world is how absolutely separate the cultures are, because when you see like TV shows, like when I'm watching Family Feud, I can see that if it's the answers are a lot of what older white people would think, like whoever they're grilling is the older white people. And then when you see families who are younger and of color, their answers are much more families of younger color people. So they don't always get the answer right. Meanwhile, in their culture, they would have definitely gotten the answer right. Like, you know, when they say who's the biggest star on the planet and they say Beyonce, and then the answer is, you know, something like Justin Timberlake or something, you know?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Loretta.
Yeah, really good.
Terry, I saw Terry unmuted. This is how we work. If you unmute, that's the talking stick, so you get to talk.
All right. I just like the encouragement to be intentional about including diversity in your life. And as a white person, the diversity that I do have is not intentional. It just happens.
Hmm.
I can stand to make it more intentional.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, Terry.
So
I like how you frame that it just happens versus being intentional. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, the natural forces of our society tend towards us being separate from each other racially. And so to have have a life experience that's multiracial, multi-ethnic, you have to be intentional to work against those natural forces. And that would be true for your kids.
I also like what Wayne put in the chat about how many biblical stories have ethnic and racial boundaries that are being undermined. That's really fantastic. I think a lot of times when David's taking a lot of Bible history right now, and a lot of times when we think about stories about people in the Bible specifically, or in those ancient times, or we color them white, right? How many pictures of Jesus are white? And that's not what it looked like.
Yeah.
And so,
the first 300, 500 years of Christian history, the center of Christian thought was North Africa. Most of the thinkers of the time, the theologians of the time, had a black skin. We don't have that kind of understanding of history, at least in a Christian perspective.
who else? Anybody else?
But I think as a parent of faith, I also find, as a parent of faith and a transracial adopted parent, to remember to bring those images into our home.
Yes.
Being raised as a kid and seeing saints as white people with blonde hair and blue eyes, and really sitting down one day and making sure that images in our house are reflective of what they more naturally would have been.
Yeah. Do you have some specific examples of how you've done that, Katie?
The Holy Family statue that sits in our house is much more reflective of a family that would have been from North Africa.
Yeah.
Several images in our house are much more reflective to families that would have been in Egypt, that would have been in Nazareth, because that's a more accurate depiction and also a more inclusive depiction in our family.
Yeah.
Good example.
Great, Katie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to go back for a minute. I found some statistics I was looking for that back to something Terry said about being intentional versus just it naturally happening. The average white American has one Black friend, 2 Latino friends, 1 Asian friend, 1 mixed race friend, and 1 other race friend, and then 3 who are of unknown race. I'm not really sure what that category means, but you kind of can understand that. Okay, so that means the average white person has 1 Black friend, 1 Latino friend, 1 Asian friend. The average Black person, it's fascinating, has 8 white friends, 2 Latino friends, 0 Asian friends, and 3 mixed race, and then 5 of some other unknown. So it's just kind of fascinating how kind of naturally segregated we are, but also how Black people specifically are kind of forced to have relationships with people who are white, whereas white people can make the choice to only stay in our racial group. It's fascinating.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna go on, skip ahead to our
Wayne
next.
had a comment.
I'm
real
sorry.
quick.
Go ahead. I apologize.
I hate to say, so I am a minister, and I hate to say, as we came up in Brooklyn in the churches, it was white flight. All of these people were moving out to Long Island, and the Lutheran Church was selling properties in Brooklyn, and reinvesting that money out in white Long Island. It was subsidizing the white flight. Very sad. And then 2, 3 weeks, churches that were empty, they're filled to the rafters with people of color. And these were churches that had rafters, but somehow the church couldn't, think, hey, let's reach out to these folks, even though they're a different color. So just can't help putting those kind of elements in there, because the church and people of faith have failed in this regard. And we confession is a part of our tradition. Well, we gotta know this history and kind of confess this history before we can really move forward and realize how forgiving
Right.
people of color have been of our actions or inactions.
Yeah.
All right, I'll shut up.
Yeah.
No,
Speaking
I was going to say something really snarky because that's my love language of, I can't believe that happens in New York. That never happens in Texas. But I won't say that snarky thing that I just was going to say.
Yeah. So segregation is just as strong here as everywhere else,
That's right.
even in the middle of a New York City, even in the middle of a place called Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a great podcast. I'm sure you guys have heard it since you're from New York, called Nice White Parents.
Oh,
It's really fascinating look at some of the schools systems that have happened, some of the stories in the schools that have happened there in New York City. So Nice White Parents. Okay, so our second list that David and I came up with has to do with raising a child who is a different race than you. So has become called transracial adoption. It's not what it was called when we did this 20 years ago, but that's what we call it now, transracial adoption. In case you haven't heard us say it yet, though, we are not experts. These are just things we have learned over the past 20 years, or more likely things we wish we had known 20 years ago. And so the first thing for this group is that you have to do all the things that were on the previous list. So that's where you have to start with that. So if you are parenting a child of a different race than you, you still need to do the work of understanding your own experience and understanding where our society is and all of those things, diversifying your life. But also we want to add to that list to do the work to understand your child, to learn their culture and find ways to celebrate their culture, whether that's through food or books or movies or recipes that you can engage with, or festivals that you can go to, ways that you can learn and celebrate the culture that your child is from. Next is to make it normal. This kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, but make it normal and safe to talk about race. And I think maybe a twist on this from the first list is that negative stereotypes are going to affect your child. You can't put them in a bubble and protect them their whole life, right? So they're gonna have these interactions. And so if you're able to talk to them early about those and have those conversations and make that a safe place for you to have them. David talked about this in his intro, when after Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were shot, we started, as we're learning, that there is a conversation that all African-American parents have with their children, and it's called The Talk, and it's about how to get home safely. And we were like, we have to have that conversation. What does that look like? This is something we've never thought of before. And so that was part of his, when he was doing his conversations with people he knew, it was, how do I have this conversation with my son? Do I have this? And every one of them was like, yes, you have to have that conversation with your son. And so making it normal and safe to talk about race with your kid.
Can I also add, as thinking about it, is that as white folks, we tend to think all conversations have to be age appropriate, right? But with our children of color, as white folks, we tend to think that they need to be older before we have these conversations. But if you're a Black parent or a Hispanic parent, let's just use the example of a Black parent. Our understanding is a Black parent has that conversation much earlier with their children than we tend to think they would. And so it's something we have to kind of challenge ourselves in, is to think about how to have an age appropriate conversation, but it be at the younger ages because they may experience them.
Next is to find adults of color or from the culture that your child is from to be part of their lives. So that can be friends, people at church, therapists. This is a great space if you can find a therapist that comes from the same culture as your child, or a doctor or dentist or those kinds of things. Those are great ways to be able to put people in their life. One of the ones that we've used several times is a barber. We took our son when he was younger. We would take him to a black barber, and he was able to develop a relationship with that person. And so finding ways to get other people of color into your kid's life. Next is to believe your kids. If they tell you a story that involves race, especially if you're white, do not brush it off or explain it away. Don't use language like, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way, or that's probably not their intention. Believe your kid. If you blow it off, brush it off, explain it away, you're going to make it harder for them to want to talk to you about it. And our belief in parenting is the number one goal is to keep the conversation open with your kids about anything, right? And so keep that conversation open, and the best way to do that is to believe your kid when they say something. And then lastly, do what you can to protect your child from overt racism. And this one came especially when it comes from someone that you know and love. So if you are in a family where you have Uncle whatever his name is, and he's saying hurtful, racist things, protect your child from that. Don't brush that off. Don't minimize that. Kind of stand in the place of protector for your kid, even when it's hard relationally with family or loved ones or coworkers or whatever that looks like. Okay, so that's our 5 things to do if you're parenting a child of a different race. Would love to hear, again, just open it up for conversation and hear what you thought about those. If you have any questions.
I think that adding people to your child's life that will be more diverse is such a good idea. I was lucky because my kids were old enough that they still had all of their biological family connections. So we were all good about working together. Like when my kids wanted a particular dish that I had never heard of or seen before, like, we could all get together, reach out. They could ask their kids what the recipe was. They could ask their parents. I could make it for them. And it really was a really good thing. But going out into the community and them seeing people like themselves was phenomenal, And I love the idea of like taking your child to professionals who are of his race, because that's going to pay dividends for the parents too.
Yeah, I love that, Loretta. We mentioned we have an open adoption with our son's birth family, and his biological grandparents on his mom's side immigrated from Nigeria, and she would come over and take over my kitchen and make meat pies and Nigerian stew, and it's a real blessing. And Nigerian stew is one of the kind of a staple in our house now. I will tell you though,
our version of
right,
Nigerian stew.
The first time she made it, she pulled out these, it's like a tomato-based sauce with chicken in it. You put on rice, and she pulled out these peppers that she was about to put in there. And I said, "What kind of pepper is that?" She said, "They're habaneros." I said, "How many are you going to put in there?" And she said, "Well, I was thinking for you guys, probably just 1." And I was like, "Maybe half."
She had 5.
And I said, "How many would you do if you were doing it for just your family?" She said, "Oh, probably 5 or 6."
Oh my God.
And let me tell you, our oldest white bio son couldn't eat it. And she'd only put half of one in there. He couldn't eat it, and we were both sweating. So
And Jeremiah was just shoveling it. I mean, he was eating it as fast as he could. It was unaffected.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is great. I've done the same thing. I've had to modify the recipes that their families gave me with things like hot sauce and stuff because I really can't take it. But yep. And by the way, all of our culinary meals now are much more diverse. Like when I first started cooking holiday meals for my family, I was thinking I would just be cooking the same holiday meals. Well, our holiday meals are so divergent now from what I grew up with. And everybody comes together and has a good time, you know?
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you, Loretta. Anybody else?
Matt's got a comment in the he says, I'm wondering if there's a way to reframe the conversations that parents have with their black and brown child about the changes that await that can threaten their lives. Often the conversations had around behavior has the impact of making the child feel bad or wrong instead of a social environment that is hostile to them.
That's a really
that almost gets to the question of how does the curriculum really help in areas like that? Because I know you dealt with it because I saw it.
Yep.
We do talk about the talk. Pat, I appreciate you bringing that up, and we have that conversation in the class. I think what's fascinating about what Mac, I hear Pat calling you Mac. It is McDonald's, so I'm gonna call you Mac because that's what Pat's doing. But I think it's a fascinating kind of.
That's perfect.
Perfect, thank you. Balance between our kids' behavior, which maybe I've focused too much on with Jeremiah, of, don't walk alone at night with a hoodie, don't run from the, and it's all about what he does, and rather than the environment that's hostile towards them. I think that's a great. If you have tips, I would love for you to share those. Anybody else want to add to that or have thoughts on that?
I think the other tension that we hear talked about is just, oh, go ahead, Mac, you go ahead.
Yeah, because I know that part of what the challenge is how I'm thinking about how do Black and brown children live in an environment and thrive in an environment that is really hostile, harmful, dangerous. It has a really negative impact on their self-esteem, on their actual lives. And so for parents, I think having a conversation about those harms, those obstacles that are everywhere, how can we have those conversations whereby they don't begin to internalize that negativity as something that is generated from them, rather than there's actually this world out there that is anti-Black, that is racist, that is saturated with white supremacy, and that is hostile to you. And you, my child, my Black or brown, beautiful child, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with this social world. And so I'm wondering if there can be more of an emphasis on how do we get at changing that social world rather than changing the essence of the child.
Yeah. I mean, we can have that done by tomorrow, right?
One of the things I think about, Mac, as you're mentioning that, is that doesn't it also go to the way that we have conversations all the time with our Black and brown children, where we are pointing out the beauty and the uniquenesses of our child, we're elevating who they are all the time with them, so that when we have to, just as if we were sending them into they were going camping, and there are some things that they need to do to be safe in the woods. There's some behaviors that you would hope that they would stay safe even if they didn't do them, but these behaviors will help you stay safe because of how important you are. That there's going to be some things I think that we need to tell them to keep them safe, but we need to keep it in the context of a much bigger conversation about how beautiful they are because they're Black and brown, how uniquely gifted and important and valuable they are because they're Black and brown. It needs to all fit in that bigger conversation somehow. I don't think we did a great job of that. I think Shelley would probably agree that we wish we had known more when he was those ages.
Go ahead, Leora.
Leora, you're on mute. You were off, and yeah.
Oh,
you're back on mute. Just hit the button once. There you go.
there you go.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know if you said this already because I'm sorry I came on late. But I think you have to teach children about the history. What was the history that led to denigration and the racism? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And and how yes, anyway, you have to talk about the rich African history and that happened in Africa prior to the slave trade, and also the African American history. But you also have to talk about the propaganda that went on to try to make the Black people seem that they were not human. So to justify the slave trade, because back in the harshness got developed over time. It got worse and worse over time. And there were some Caucasian people that felt very badly about that. But to keep them from feeling badly, the powers that be said, well, you don't have to feel badly because they're not human anyway. So it's okay to beat them. It's okay to do whatever because they're not like you. They're not human. Right. So I think, children have to, the harsh as it is, they have to have that this was a propaganda piece that was put forward, not that it was real, but to keep it going. It's been kept going up until the present time so that, you can keep the white supremacy thing going without feeling, guilty about it. But I think they need to know that, and at different age groups, you add a little bit during blah, blah, so they won't internalize all that negativity and think something's wrong with them.
I love that. And I think, Leora, kind of go back to our class, if you're a white parent like we were of a Black child, we didn't grow up with that information to share with our Black son. That's why we had to do the work. We had to read the books. We had to learn the history. And if you expect that your children are going to learn it in school, they're not.
No,
the schools are not going to teach them their Black history. Black History Month in February is not going to be enough. I've had some Black friends tell me that they learned Black history in Black church. Black church taught Black history because they knew it was not going to be taught in the schools. So that's why, kind of back to our class, that is a big reason that we're teaching the class, is that white folks need to know the history for our own anti-racist journey, but also so that we can, if we have children that are Black and brown, we know how to get to the resources and how important it is for them to learn their own history and to see how magnificent they are. And their history is, even through the suffering and oppression that Black folks and brown folks have gone through in this country. Those are
Right,
just
right.
tremendous comments. Thank you.
I'm going to use that as a segue to kind of do a little promo for our class. And then with whatever time left we have, we'd love to have any more questions or comments or anything like that. So I'm going to, maybe, yep. So as we mentioned, we have a class that we called Let's Talk Race, a beginner's guide to conversations about race. It's 5 weeks long and it's an hour and a half each week on Zoom. Each week there's minimal homework. So we give you lots of different things you can do for your homework. You get to there's some required pieces and there's a lot of things you can choose from, which means we've curated a lot of additional content for you to use to continue your learning. And it's, as David mentioned earlier, it's designed for white people, but it's open to everyone. So we have many friends of color, all different colors, who've come and said, wow, I didn't know any of this history, or I didn't know these different things, or maybe even, oh, that explains why white people act that way. So it's open to everybody, but it is designed for white folks. And then it is no entry, it's low entry. So it's donate what you can. So any donations go towards helping us create more programs and be able to continue to offer this to others. And our goal is to create a safe place to learn and to ask questions. We've found, especially with a lot of white folks, we start talking about this, they're like, I want to ask these questions, but I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong, or I'm afraid I'm going to hurt somebody's feeling, or I'm afraid somebody's going to call me a racist. We don't do any of those things. And so we want to create a safe place for people to come and ask questions, so that then maybe they won't ask those questions that are triggering and hurtful to their friends of color. They can ask us, we'll take those arrows, we'll take that, whatever that is, and create the safe place for that. So if you want more information about our class, you can scan this QR code if you're that tech savvy. We'd love for you to do that. We do have 2 classes starting this summer. One is starts June 10th. It is specifically for educators, and so it's being facilitated by educators. And so if you know anyone who is in the school system, pre-K to college, public, private, paid, unpaid, any way that you're involved in the education system, we'd love for you to join this class. And then there's another one that starts on July 10th. We offer these classes year round. And so if these 2 times don't work for you, you can also at this link sign up for our mailing list, and then you'll get information about upcoming classes. And then you can also follow us on Instagram or Facebook at LTR Ministries is the name of our nonprofit. And so,
and I put the website in the chat. We can include it with the documents we send, with the stuff we send out as well.
So can I ask a question about the curriculum now?
yes.
Yeah. I've taken it. I think it's an excellent curriculum. I think we might be able to learn things that we can then teach our children, or we can learn things that we can teach the parents who are raising children. We run a large post-adoption program here at the coalition, who's putting on this particular conference, and some people that are raising children of color right now, and they happen to be white, have never had any sort of education like this before, but they have us as their workers. And how can you see the curriculum helping us have the tools to help the families who might perhaps be of different political persuasions, but facts are facts, and hopefully once we learn them and we share them with the other adults, that maybe it can get filtered down through their children because they sincerely believe this worker that they have a good relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than a how-to on transracial, it's more like, what can a curriculum do to increase awareness?
Mm-hmm.
So the curriculum is not specifically about adoption. So, I mean, we tell our story at the beginning. So adoption is part of how we got to where we are, but
Right.
it's not part of the curriculum. The curriculum talks about the historical, the biblical. So we spend a lot of the first week talking about what the Bible says or doesn't say about race. We go over the history of race, how race was created. We talk about what is white culture. A lot of times white people feel like we don't have a culture. Everybody else has culture. We're just normal. So we talk about what is white culture. Then we spend time talking about privilege and what are the reasons that we block conversations. Why is it so hard for us to have conversations about race? Why do we kind of shut those things down? And what does that look like? And then we talk about the word white supremacy has already been said today. So we talk about kind of how we see that at play now. One of the main things we talk about, though, is what is called systemic racism. And so what systems are we seeing this play out in? A lot of times as Americans, it's easy for us to think about race and racism as individualistic. I'm not a bad person, I'm not racist, so what's the problem? And so we talk a lot about where do we see this in the systems at play, and how is it affecting people today? So that's kind of what the class is. And so I think once you have kind of those kinds of things in your hand, it can then move on to other conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We like to say we're not really in the racial reconciliation work. We are the people saying, hey, y'all need to go get into that work, right? There's a bridge that needs to be crossed, and you need to go cross that bridge. And so that's kind of our role. The analogy I use a lot is, I don't know if any of you are runners, have like done a marathon or any of those kinds of things. I have not, but I hear rumor that when you go to run a marathon, there's a tent over on the side that gives you all the information about the marathon. It gives you the map and the little number you're supposed to pin on your shirt and that kind of thing. That's who we are when it comes to conversations about race. We're going to give you information. We're going to give you history and kind of that pre-work that you can then use to have more meaningful conversations about race with your friends of color and with white people. And hopefully that you can stand up in systems that you're involved in to make a difference.
The class really can give you a tool as a parent or as a someone who works in the adopted and foster care space, give you the tools to do the work that you have to do to learn about white supremacy and racism and how it functions in our society and how it has functioned historically. We think it's a good tool to really get a great start, and we give you resources that you can continue that journey even after the 5th week of the class, so that you can keep learning and keep growing, to become an even better parent and a better citizen, a better human, a better Christian in this racialized country. Thanks, Pat.
I don't know how much time we have left, but we'd love to, if you had any other questions or thoughts. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
I should also say the class is not partisan. We aren't afraid to talk about politics, things that are political that affect people, policy. But we don't pick a party. We don't pick sides. All sides have plenty of culpability in this conversation. So it isn't a partisan approach to this.
Good word, thank you.
And the homework assignments you talk about are really incredibly interesting. They are talked about at the next session. And then there's a whole list of other things that people could watch or read about during the 5 weeks. And they're all very, very interesting, and a lot of stuff that most people have not seen before. So it truly is educational, and it really helps people, view the world much more in the way it actually is than in the way that they imagine, because their lives have been surrounded by, well, that was their reality, you know.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat.
Do your class information talk about how to speak to people who are of a much older generation? Because I find that it's those kinds of topics get mired with things like wanting to respect the elderly and wanting to you know protect your children from their beliefs and things like that. Do you guys address any of those types of issues?
Dave?
when we pause, we're always trying to figure out who's gonna take the question. So I guess it's me. We don't, so in the class, what we found that people say is that they feel more equipped to have those conversations with anyone. That a lot of us, especially white folks, we're just so unfamiliar with the vocabulary of race and racism and white supremacy and the concepts and ways to talk about it that we just don't engage the conversations. So we feel ill-equipped. And so what we hear from people is they feel more equipped to have those conversations. We don't specifically provide, here's a tool for how to talk to an older generation white person about their racism, but we provide the tools and the information to help when you have those conversations be a more effective conversation partner. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The most common comment we get is, how do I have a conversation with my family? It's so hard. And we actually developed the class encouraging white folks to have conversations with people of color about race. The most common comment we get is, I can't even talk to my own family about it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic. I will tell you, though, that having conversations with people of color is really important. And my example of that is when I had these conversations, one of the guys that I grew up with from elementary school through college, we went to college together. I went and had lunch with him and I said, Japheth, look, you were in our friend group. He's a black man. I don't think I've ever asked you, what was your experience like being black in our friend group? And for 2 hours, he unloaded stories of his experiences that were because of his race in Longview, in College Station, where we went to school, and many of which I was present for. And I never knew they existed. Part of what's happened is that there is, because of our segregated living and our challenge that white people have with our privilege of being able to navigate the world without having to talk about race, we don't know how to talk about it. So we aren't a safe conversation partner with our friends of color. And so we never hear what their real lived experiences are. And those real lived experiences are impactful into us understanding what real life is, and whether it's real life for our kids or our need to engage. And those stories I've found are the most powerful conversation pieces with other white folks and family members, is telling actual stories. Stories are harder to negate than fact. What are facts? And so as you grow in your relationships with people of color and are having more safe conversations with them about their lived experiences, the better you will be as a conversation partner with your elderly white family members, your cousin Eddie, that's we might call a racist. We wouldn't use that. Does that make sense? I don't know if that helps,
Yes.
Loretta.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah. took too long.
Terry raised his hand. Were you going to say something or
Yeah,
ask?
I have a real particular question about your July class.
Mm-hmm.
It's listed as 7:30 to 9 CDT.
Yes, sir.
And what time is that in New York? A is CDT is Central Daylight Time, right?
Great. So that would be 8:30 your time.
8:30 my time. Okay.
And we'll in the fall we'll have classes that'll be during the day and at night. So we try to vary them depending on, we have several facilitators that help facilitate the class. And so it kind of depends on their schedules is kind of the
Thank you.
Can you break down the 5 classes for us? What do you cover in the 5? Because you have 5 classes. Why do you have 5 classes?
Yeah.
5 classes or 5 weeks?
5 weeks.
Weeks. I thought they were classes, but maybe not.
Yeah, that's fine. We consider one class to be 5 weeks long. So of the
Okay.
of the 5 weeks, and I kind of went over this, I just didn't make that distinction. The first week we talk about the biblical and history of how we created race and white culture. The second week we talk about privilege. So that's where we talk about specifically white privilege. The third is our blocking techniques. Why do we stop conversations, and what are the tools that we use to stop those conversations, and how do we become aware of those so that we can continue conversation? The fourth is supremacy. How is that seen throughout today? Where do we see that? We typically think of it as white burning crosses and white hoods, but what does it actually look like? And then the fifth week is mostly a discussion about systems. And so we spend a lot of time, everybody talking about where they see this playing out in different systems. And then we do a lot of next steps in week 5. And
in all 5 weeks, we build on the definition of systemic racism. And then it's really focused in the 5th week on what are the systems we see.
And we, the class is designed in an hour and a half, that half of it is spent in discussion. So you'll spend about 20 minutes at the beginning discussing the homework. And then there's about a 40 to 45 minute teaching block where David and I, there's a video of us teaching content. And then you spend the last 25 to 30 minutes discussing that content. And so that's kind of what the hour and a half looks like. And then we always have overtime or after party afterwards where you can stay on as long as you need to and ask questions and get to know other people in your class. We have people from all over the country in these public classes that we offer. And so, so everybody is welcome.
We've even had folks from other countries.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from anybody who hasn't spoken already before we recycle the people who have. And if not, then we'll go back with anybody else. Anybody have any questions? Anything? Of course, this is a year where it's going to be quite a year with the election, and trying not to be political is going to be very, very hard. So this might be the year to do a class with you guys to help keep us centered on what's right. So Terry, I just saw that your hand was up again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say I'm a professional Catholic, and my observation is that the Catholic Church has a lot to do, a lot of learning and growing and reconciliation to do. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way I learned about the Parks was through Jamar Tisby, who wrote the book The Color of Compromise, and what he was talking about was essentially churches, and how churches in each section of history have compromised on race issues when the church could have taken a leadership role in it, and how they compromised and why they compromised. So that's so I'll be forever grateful for Dr. Tisby, because he introduced me to this wonderful curriculum and the great work that David and Shelley are doing. So
we are big fans of Dr. Tisby, and so if you have not read, he has 2 books, The Color of Compromise and also How to Fight Racism. Both of them are exceptional, and so we highly recommend his books.
And Any final thoughts about your curriculum and certain things that are in it that you think would be very useful for people to hear about?
Yeah. One thought I had, Pat, and I appreciate you kind of teeing that up, is I think a lot of times, specifically for white people, we're afraid to walk into this conversation because we're afraid that you're going to make us feel guilty or make us feel ashamed of being white or make us feel like we are bad people. And I just want to be really clear that we fight against that with every fiber of our being, because each of us were created by God with the skin color that he gave us. It is not something to be ashamed of. It is not something to say, I'm a bad person because I have white skin. But we do have a responsibility. And so we talk a lot about guilt versus responsibility, and how do we balance that? What do we do with these feelings that come up? And so I just want you to know that we get a lot of feedback from people that say, I was really nervous signing up for this class because I was afraid you were going to make me feel guilty, and I did not feel that way. And so I hope that helps alleviate any hesitation. Thank you for that.
And in the final minutes, how can people of color who take the class benefit from the class?
Well, and I think we've mentioned that many people of color have taken it and said, thank you so much for doing this work. Thank you for, I didn't know this history, because we talk about how race was created and things like that. And so I think it's a great opportunity for people of color to be involved, but we also recognize that it can be there's some things we talk about. I mean, we put whiteness right there in the middle of the room to talk about. And we recognize for people of color that you have to look at it all day long, and it may not be the space for you. We do partner with another organization that works with multi-ethnic and multiracial groups. And so if you want more information about that, then we're happy to share that too.
The other thing I'd say is that there are some groups that, like some racial and ethnic groups in America. So let's say if you immigrate here from a country and you come into this space and you're like, what is all of this dynamic? I've immigrated from Africa, and now all of a sudden I'm Black, and these things happen to me. It can help you understand maybe some of the history of why America functions the way it does.